The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1 in the name of Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he stand by all his statements?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, yes, and in particular when I was asked a few months ago about what I thought of a Labor Party proposal that government legislate interest rates, I said, quote, "That's a pretty dumb idea," and I stand by that statement.
Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does he stand by his statement that he is not concerned that trading banks are not passing on the full OCR rate cut?
The Honourable Bill English.
Yes, Mr Speaker, in the context in which it was made, the banks operate in a competitive environment. I see some of them have decided, for instance, today to favour their depositors by putting deposit rates up, and for all those New Zealanders who save and put money in the bank, they'd probably prefer that. Other banks over time may decide to pass all those reductions on to borrowers.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
In light of that answer then, has he sought to correct the Prime Minister who said he thought that banks should, quote, pass on in full the rate cut to their customers?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, that of course is, as you would expect from the opposition, not quite what the Prime Minister said. In fact, he made a comment to the effect that he expected that's what they would do in the context of a competitive market. And fundamentally, it's our view that the competition among banks will determine how much is passed on. It's not the government's job to tell them how to run their business.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
If it's not the government's job to tell banks how to run their business, why did John Key say, and I quote, "If banks behave like good corporate citizens, they should pass on Reserve Bank cuts in full to their customers"?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, because good corporate citizens do what their customers demand that they do. And that's what will happen. In the end, they will decide how to respond to demand in the market, and New Zealanders who are worried about it can ring up their bank, demand a lower interest rate, and I'm told that they'll get it.
Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
What responsibility does he take for New Zealanders not receiving the full benefit of the OCR cut today, given the ANZ Bank statement that lowering lending rates would, quote, throw fuel on the fire in an overheated housing market?
I'm guessing not much.
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, this week the primary responsibility for the housing market in New Zealand lies with the Auckland Council. It has in front of it a plan, and we, like the council, hope that they will sign off a plan that is convincing about bringing more supply to the market, because that's the critical variable in the housing market, and the Auckland Council have control over that variable.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
When 75% of New Zealanders are telling his government that they are not doing enough to address the housing crisis and that this is the reason banks are giving for not cutting rates, why won't he front up to New Zealanders and admit that his government's failure to even admit there is a housing crisis is a major reason why mortgage rates will not be cut?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, in the first place, the member is making an assumption about mortgage rates, and I think we've yet to see how the competitive pressures in the market will work out. As it happens, banks have reduced mortgage rates over the last 6 months or so by more than the reductions in the OCR, and that could happen easily over the next few months. But the key decisions now for the housing market lie with the entity that regulates the Auckland housing market, and that is the Auckland City Council.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does he recognise that he is now completely out of touch in ruling out a review of immigration policy settings when the Reserve Bank have now joined every opposition party and most economic commentators in saying that unsustainable levels of immigration are putting downward pressure on wages and upward pressures on housing prices?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, immigration policy settings are always under review, but I'll tell you one part of it we won't be reviewing. The biggest single change is New Zealanders staying home. And unlike New Zealand First, our policy is not to kick New Zealanders out in order to reduce the migration numbers.
Order. 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 Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Why is he refusing to undertake a review of monetary policy in the Reserve Bank's Policy Targets Agreement when, on the basis of today's monetary policy statement, inflation will not reach the midpoint target until 2018, meaning it has failed to meet the PTA for 7 years by that point?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, along with other commentators, I'd invite the member to specify what he thinks the alternative should be. Because, in fact, across the world there's so much concern about deflation that central banks are taking extraordinary means to try and reach the inflation targets. And it turns out inflation targeting is probably more important now than it's ever been. In any case, the PTA is reviewed every 5 years as it expires, and that will happen in the next 12 months or so.
Question number 2.